Are you ready to see what the new 14th gen Intel i9 CPU can actually do in a pre-built PC? We have reviewed a lot of gaming PCs recently, but I'm especially excited to share with you our very first PC review with this absolute beast of a CPU. It's said to be capable of speeds of up to 6 gigahertz with thermal velocity boost. If you follow this channel, you may have noticed that Alienware PCs always seem to get the most views. Well, a lot has changed this year, and in this 100% honest and unbiased review, I'm going to share with you everything that you need to know about the latest Alienware Aurora R16. This configuration that we have here for you includes the latest 14th gen Intel i9 14900KF CPU and 4090 GPU. XMP RAM will also be available with this new version of the R16, and it's finally going to be black, not that green color that I've always complained about. That previous unboxing video that I did, that one had the i7 13700F CPU with a 4070 GPU. But since then, thankfully I was able to snag the latest 14th gen Intel version before release as well. I also ran all of my tests with my Founders Edition 4080 GPU as well. Actually, 3 different configurations extensively tested on this PC. I'm going to quickly take you through the unboxing and what's included, gaming and creator benchmarks, design and build quality, the internals, thermals, fan noise, overall ease of use, pricing breakdowns and comparing its price to performance ratios against the competition, talk about some of the challenges that I came across with its upgradability and future improvements, and my overall top pros and cons. If you decide against this PC after anything that I say in this video, just keep watching, because I'm also going to be sharing with you some alternative PCs that I recommend for every budget. Links down below for all the computers that I mentioned. I guarantee that by the end of this video, you will know if this PC is right for you or not, if you watch the whole thing. But if you still have any questions after watching this entire video, just shoot me a comment, and if you're publicly subscribed, I guarantee a personal response. All right, now let's rewind back into the past real quick and check out the unboxing. Inside at the top, we've just got a warranty and quick start guide, and then they're actually including some pretty cheap and basic keyboards and mice by default now. Nothing special, but they're free, I guess. If you want to step it up to something nicer that matches your PC, then stay tuned for my ultimate Alienware gaming accessory review coming soon. Then we've got the thinnest power cable that I think I've ever seen on a pre-built PC. Only an 18 gauge cord versus the 16 gauge on all the other 1000 watt power supplies that I've seen. Then we've got the typical thank you card and Alienware fanboy stickers. Now, when it comes to the design, I personally have been getting very tired of the same spaceship design year after year. So this change is a breath of fresh air to me. The more boxy version with rounded edges of the R16 looks pretty slick if you're like me that can appreciate cleaner and more simplistic designs, although it has kind of morphed into something that resembles a large majority of the other pre-builds. It still does look like an Alienware PC though, with their typical hexagon ventilation and iconic Tron bar, which we've seen pretty consistently with their laptops. Aside from the Tron bar though, very little to be excited about when it comes to lighting effects. The only other illuminated parts are the Alienware power button on the front and this rear exhaust fan. Overall, in person, the inside just feels very dark compared to other gaming pre-builds. As far as functional design, while it is an improvement, there's still some things that could have been done better. We're still using a proprietary motherboard with the front I/O built directly into it, which means that no other motherboard can work in this case. We've only got one intake fan on the front, which pulls air in from both sides of this front panel. It's not life or death to have only one intake fan for 4070 GPU, but I definitely think there should be 2 if you're going to have a 4080 or 4090. The fact that this PC has slimmed down so much though from the previous version kind of highlights how much wasted space there was on the R15. The R16 is only about 8 inches wide, 18 inches deep, including that handle on the back, and about 16.5 inches tall, and weighs just under 34 pounds. To access the internals, you first need a screwdriver to unlock it from the back, and then pull on this handle to pop off the side glass panel. Along here is where we've got our 12-phase voltage regulation that essentially funnels down power to a more manageable and consistent level for our CPU. This was less than exciting on the original i7 13700F CPU that I got on my first R16, but it is absolutely essential for this brand new unlocked i9 14900K CPU. Then right here, for those of you that are new to PC gaming, is the CPU cooler, which uses a liquid to transfer the heat that's generated from the CPU up through these tubes into this 240mm radiator at the top, where the heat is then quickly spread out and then blown blown out of the case. Next to that are 2 sticks of DDR5 RAM at 5600 MHz. Still no RGB or heat sinks on the RAM. We do finally get XMP RAM options though, and that RAM is finally black, not that ugly green color. Unfortunately, it wasn't yet available when Alienware sent me this review unit, but I am glad that's finally an option. And next to that, also without heat sinks, are 2 M.2 SSDs. These are both 1 terabyte, but it will work with up to 4 terabytes for a max total of 8 terabytes. And I'll show you the speeds that those tested at here in a sec. Next to that, our killer Wi-Fi 6E wireless card, and then right underneath our CPU, the most important and most expensive part of our PC, Dell's version of the 4090 GPU. It's a fairly light and basic looking GPU, not very big for a 4090 as you can see compared to my 4080, and especially compared to my MSI Gaming Trio 4090. We've got about 25 millimeters of clearance with Dell's 4090 and 22 millimeters with Dell's 4070, which both are less than ideal. And then I tested my much thicker Founders Edition 4080, which if you don't know is the exact same size as a Founders Edition 4090, and it gave us even less clearance with only about a 16 millimeter gap underneath. That's not very good for airflow, and you're going to see how that affected thermals here in a sec. I also tried to fit in my MSI Gaming Trio 4090, but that one did not fit. We've got 2 PCIe expansion card slots, but none of them are actually accessible with a GPU installed. Not even the smallest GPU, so kind of pointless. Then in the bottom right corner, we've got a bracket for one 3.5-inch mechanical hard drive. Then lastly on the bottom, another proprietary component, our 1000 watt 80 plus platinum power supply. Even if you get a less powerful configuration than we got, I highly recommend you select a 1000 watt power supply if you ever plan on upgrading your CPU or GPU in the future. It's only $50 more than the 500 watt, and it's something that you cannot swap out in the future because the connector is not standard. And then swinging around to the back, nothing very interesting here, just a little bit of pretty basic cable management. Usually on the back of PC cases, we'll have a couple extra 2.5-inch SSD bays and a couple brackets at the bottom for even more 3.5-inch mechanical hard drives. For the ports on the front, we've got a headphone and microphone combo jack, 3 USB 3.2 Gen 1s, the bottom one with power share, and a twice as fast USB-C 3.2 Gen 2 also with power share. On the back, we've got a very generous amount of high quality audio ports, and then we've got 8 more USBs, 6 of them USB-As and 2 of them ultra fast USB-Cs, and then we've got an Ethernet port, 2 connectors for your Wi-Fi antennas, and then on the back of our GPU, 3 display ports and 1 HDMI port. For the software, you can see with this new build, we've got access to the brand new Alienware Command Center. Right here is where you can fine tune your performance profiles based on whether you prefer quiet fans and lower performance or louder fans with the ultimate performance. Or you can go into custom and fine tune your fans individually if you want to. In the Alien Effects tab, you can set a bunch of different custom colors and animations for your 3 RGB zones. It's honestly a little annoying though that the command center sets all of these effects for each game automatically for you though, meaning that you have to go back into the preset for each game and change it manually just to keep the computer from changing colors at all. And this will all sync well with Alienware keyboards and mice as well, and other accessories. And unfortunately, if you're one of those that likes to tinker with the BIOS to customize and squeeze just a little bit more performance out of your machine, you're kind of out of luck with this one as there's very few options within the BIOS compared to what I'm used to with other pre-builds. If you do get an unlocked K version of an Intel CPU, like our new 14900K, then you'll also have an option here for overclocking with very basic options as well. In my experience, it really didn't change performance that much, and we're going to get to that here in a sec. When it came to the fan noise, these were our results after testing each of the main fan profiles. In quiet mode, it was just a little under 41 decibels, getting as low as 40.7. As you can see, this was just barely the quietest quiet mode out of all the PCs that I've ever tested. And then when moving up to performance mode, it only brought the fan noise up to about 41.6 decibels. And again, the quietest performance mode that I've ever seen. You can see the progress throughout the years with the R13 having the loudest fans ever in performance mode, improving a little bit with the R15, and now with the R16 having the largest acoustic improvement that we've seen yet. But then when going into custom settings and brute forcing all the fans to full speed at 100%, that brought it up pretty high to about 68 decibels. Which is honestly kind of pointless because it did not improve performance at all by maxing them out like that. And it only brought average temperatures down by about 5 degrees. It's honestly just best to stick with Alienware profiles here. For the thermals, in our thermal imaging time lapse from the moment the computer is turned on to when it was fully engaged in gaming, you can see that heat is accumulating on the glass right next to the GPU. And opening up the glass panel reveals just a little bit more of what's going on here, as the side of the 4090 GPU does generate quite a bit of heat. Fortunately, a lot of that heat does successfully escape out about the back and top exhaust fans though. This side exhaust ventilation was pretty key in keeping these temperatures lower as well. The majority of my testing was spent in actual gameplay though. These were our CPU temps for several different games at 1080p with each version of the R16 that we tested. Quite a bit of an improvement over the R15, except for Witcher 3 for some reason, and then as expected, much cooler temperatures with the i7 480 and 470 versions. Comparing it to the other i9 4090 PCs though, revealed it to still be on the hotter end compared to most. And then averaging all of these gaming temperatures together, we get an even better broad perspective on how it holds up against the most recent PCs that we've tested. Still near the top for CPU temperatures, but not within throttling limits. That's not to say that the CPU wasn't limited though, and we'll get to that here in a sec. I actually pulled this new 14th gen CPU and put it in the Skytech Eclipse that I still have in the studio, and surprisingly that was the coolest i9 CPU that I've ever seen. That just goes to show you how much better liquid cooling with 3 140mm fans are versus Alienware's 2 120mm fans. When it came to the GPU temperatures, I sorted this chart by the GPU at 4K since high resolution gaming is very heavy on the GPU and less on the CPU, and the R16 was kind of in the middle of the pack here, which honestly is better than being the absolute hottest 4090 GPU like the last R15 was. Alright, performance and gaming benchmarks. The second most important part of this review. The most important part is the price to performance, and we're going to get to that here in a sec. For Cinebench R23, which simulates its 3D rendering power, we got a multi-core score of 35,210 and a single core score of 2263. I am a little surprised that it actually did slightly worse than the 13th gen i9 and the R15 here. The same thing happened when we put this 14th gen CPU in the Skytech Eclipse. And as you can see, the more budget-friendly versions of the R16 scored pretty low compared to the rest as well. Those have the less powerful F versions of the CPU though. Stay with me though, because the price to performance ratios are what really matter, and we're going to get to that here in a sec. Another very helpful test for you 3D renderers is the V-Ray benchmark. And these were our CUDA, RTX, and overall V-Ray performance scores. You can see that it's just barely below average with the GPU scoring here. It's got the same GPU as the R15, but it's in a more efficient case, so it was able to perform a little bit better. For the V-Ray performance, which is another CPU rendering test, you can see that it just barely outperformed the R15, which was the weakest K-variant i9 CPU out of all the pre-builts that we've tested this year. Well, technically the CPU itself wasn't weaker, it's just that unfortunately, its full power and potential is not realized in Alienware desktops. And all of these tests reveal this to be a similar situation with the 14th gen i9. You can see that putting this CPU in the Skytech Eclipse resulted in the best V-Ray performance score that we've ever seen. And for those of you who use Blender, we got a GPU score of 13,101 and a CPU score of 501. You can see from the charts for the GPU that this was about average. The two lower end configurations that we tested ranked also about where I expected them to. Again, for the CPU score though, it seemed to underperform in each configuration category. And the last benchmarks for creatives before we get into gaming are the Puget Benchmarks. If you're an editor in DaVinci, then you'll be pleased to know that the 14th gen i9 version of the R16 had the highest score that I've ever seen. And the other two configurations also topped the charts in their categories as well. Things were a bit different in Adobe Premiere though, with it just barely coming in third place, but not by much. Still, I had hoped for it to be the best with the 14th gen i9. If you're wondering why there's a lot less PCs on this chart, that's because a recent update on the Puget Benchmarks for Adobe Premiere drastically changed how that benchmark works. For Photoshop, the R16 ranked slightly below average again, but not by much. And then surprisingly, just barely the lowest score for an i9 4090 when it came to After Effects. For the SSDs, the main drives that we stored everything on, we got speeds of over 7,100 megabytes per second read and 6,500 megabytes per second write. This is super fast, but it's about what we've seen on other pre-builts as well. Except for that Skytech Eclipse, that one was about half the speeds. Not really sure why they used such a low-end drive on that one. For 3D Mark, which is a great benchmark used to predict a computer's overall gameability, we got an overall score of 32,727, a graphics score of 36,726, and a CPU score of 20,240. This overall score is pretty much tied with the 14th gen Skytech Eclipse machine. The other two variants were on the lower end in their categories. Actual gaming benchmarks are probably what you guys care the most about though. And these were our average FPS results we got for several games at their highest preset settings at 1080p. Here, this R16 with a 14th gen i9 performed more like a 13th gen i9. Slightly better overall than the Aurora R15 though. Then averaging all of these gaming FPS together and zooming out to compare it against everything that we've tested recently, you can see how it stacks up overall. Coming in around 5th place, with the other two configurations on the lower end in their categories as well. We also got similar results in our 1440p chart as you can see here, but then when moving up to 4K, the R16 with the best specs on paper, finally performed the best overall. The i7 480 version about average, and then the i7 470 version about where I'd expect it to be. Okay, so this is how everything ranks when comparing raw performance, but let's check out what changes when we factor in the pricing. Right now, at the time of this recording, the lower spec model that we tested with an i7 and 4070 is priced at $1,700. The mid-range i7 480 version that we tested, about $2,300, and the maxed out version with the latest 14th gen i9 and 4090, $3,500, which is actually less than most pre-builts right now with 13th gen i9s. The similar spec HP Omen 45L that we also reviewed though is actually about $300 less than this and performed pretty well. The previous Alienware Aurora R15 is about $200 more than this R16 with similar specs at about $3,700. The Corsair Vengeance i7 400 about $300 more. Corsair Vengeance PCs are a little bit more reliable though, and they come with a 2-year warranty versus the 1 year from most other pre-builts. Skytech Eclipse also $300 more. The Legion Tower 7i Gen 8 $500 less if it was still in stock. That one had an insane deal about a week ago, but it conveniently went out of stock after I brought more attention to it. And my absolute favorite if money was no object, the decked out Corsair Vengeance i8 at a whopping $800 more at $4,300. And this leads me to the most important part of this review, the price to performance ratios. As you can see here at 1080p gaming, the lower spec 4070 and 4080 versions of the R16 have the lowest dollar per FPS ratios out of all the 40 series pre-builts that we've tested so far. Except for the Skytech Azure 2, which is currently still the value champion overall. Finally, we can consider Alienware desktops to be a good deal. You can see that the i9 4090 version has the second best ratio for PCs with i9s and 4090s as well. Similar results with 1440p gaming, but with the i7 480 version looking like an even better value with the third lowest price to performance ratio. And then when stepping it up to 4K gaming, the 4080 version now with the second best dollar per FPS ratio out of all the gaming PCs that I've ever tested in 4K. Technically first place if you factor in PCs that are actually in stock. No word yet on when the Legion 7i Gen 8 is actually going to be in stock with an i9 and 4090. If the R16 has been less than convincing in this review, these are my recommendations for every budget. I'll have updated links in the comments and description for all the computers that I mentioned. For under $2,500, I would go with this i7 480 version of the CyberPower PC Gamer Supreme for just over $2,300. Basically the same specs as the less expensive version of this i7 400 that we tested, but quite a bit cheaper. Although I prefer the Corsair version, this one is a good option if you can't afford Corsairs. In my experience though, CyberPower PCs do tend to get a little hotter than most, so just keep that in mind. If $2,300 is still too much, for those with a budget under $2,000, the Skytech Azure 2 that I recently reviewed is what I recommend. For around $1,500, I would go with the new CyberPower PC Gamer Supreme with a 13th gen i7 and 4060 Ti. Closer to $1,000, and I'd get its little brother, the CyberPower PC Gamer Extreme with a 13th gen i5 and 4060 GPU. For under $1,000 at only $800, I recommend the Victus by HP with a new 13th gen i5, and then make sure to select at least a 1660 Super GPU before checkout. This is the bare minimum that I would recommend for semi-decent gaming though. That is not a PC for people that like to crank up graphic settings if you want a decent frame rate and responsiveness. If you're coming from a console like PS5 or the Xbox Series X, and you want the graphics to at least match that, then you're going to want to select the 4060 GPU option before checkout. I've also done quite a few monitor reviews lately, so make sure to subscribe and check those out. Or if you just want to save some time and take my word for it, my absolute favorite so far was the Corsair Xeneon Flex OLED, which is a massive 45-inch ultra-wide that you can use flat or bend it for a very steep 800R curve. That one is $1,500 though. My second favorite, which actually has the best picture, was the slightly smaller Alienware AW3423 DWF 34-inch curved OLED gaming monitor at $900. A budget closer to $400, I'd go with the Samsung Odyssey G5 ultra-wide curved. If you just want something decent to get by, then the Samsung Odyssey G5 1C 32-inch for only $250 is what I would get. But back to the R16, I also tried out quite a few upgrades. I added a second RGB intake fan on the front, a Corsair iQ H100i Elite AIO liquid cooling system with a really cool looking screen, 2 sticks of Kingston Fury Beast RGB XMP RAM, and heat sinks on my SSDs. Links down below for all of these as well. These 2 replacement fans and 1 extra fan connected to a hub which normally you put on the back of a PC case, except this back panel had these weird ridges that prevented it from closing. So you're gonna have to put that somewhere inside inside the case, most likely near the bottom next to that hard drive bracket. Another frustrating thing is that there's absolutely no USB headers on the motherboard. Most have at least 2. So I actually had to run converter cables from 2 rear ports back into the case in order for me to be able to control the LCD screen and RGB on these new fans. On top of this, you get a pretty annoying CPU fan detect warning every time you boot up. Everything did work fine though. The aftermarket XMP RAM also worked in this PC at base speeds, but Alienware's BIOS would not let me enable XMP speeds for it. I reached out to Alienware and they told me that third-party XMP profiles will not be enabled by the BIOS. And then the new heat sinks that I put on the SSDs, not only does it look a lot nicer, it was also about 40 degrees cooler with them on. The extra intake fan I'd say is only worth it for looks, as it only really resulted in a few degrees lower temperatures for the GPU on average. Pros and cons. My number 1 con is upgradability. One of the biggest gripes of Alienware desktops is their use of proprietary parts. Neither the motherboard or the power supply can be upgraded or replaced. So when the next round of CPUs or GPUs are released, there's a chance they're not going to work in this PC. PCs like this are best for those that are getting the lower end configurations of current gen CPUs and GPUs. That way in the future they can still upgrade when top tier current gen drops in price when next gen gets released. My number 2 con is the CPU power limiting. You can see from the tests and comparing to the Skytech Eclipse, also with a 14th gen i9, that the CPU is not performing to its full potential in an Alienware desktop. This was more apparent in some tests than others, but it was noticeable in the CPU tests like the Blender and V-Ray performance tests. My overall top pros for this PC, number 1 is that price to performance ratio. This PC is very, very fast. And because Alienware has priced it so fairly, all the configurations of this PC had some of the best price to performance ratios out of all the PCs that I've ever tested at every resolution. And number 2 was the fan noise. Especially considering how loud the R13 was a couple years ago, I was very impressed to see the improvement here, with the quietest fans out of all the gaming PCs that I've ever tested. Overall, I can understand why some PC gaming enthusiasts are still going to frown upon Alienware because of their use of proprietary parts. This PC is more for the PC gamer that only cares about the price to performance ratios and sees future motherboard upgrading as more of a chore than something to enjoy. Honestly, most people that are buying pre-built PCs are not going to want to go through the hassle of replacing the most difficult part of your PC to remove. GPUs and not even CPUs are that time consuming to upgrade, but the time that it takes to disconnect your motherboard and all the cables in order to make your PC compatible with the latest CPU or GPU is time that many on Team Prebuilt are not going to want to spend on later. I do think that Alienware is only hurting themselves though by not bending to the will of the masses and making their PCs compatible with standard motherboards and power supplies. Yes, some people don't care, and by the time they buy a new PC, they want to just replace the entire thing, but they are losing a lot of would-be customers by not making that change. Now, if you do decide to purchase this PC or any of the others that I mentioned, then please remember to use my affiliate links in the comments and description below, as I get a small commission at no cost to you for every single purchase made. And it's actually a major factor in keeping this channel going and getting better and better for you. I'd also like to personally thank all of my members for their monthly support of this channel. I really appreciate you guys. Every little bit helps. Also, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe with notifications turned on to stay up to date with all of my latest tech and gaming PCs. Thanks for watching, guys. I love you guys. God bless.